You felt like you were being punished any which way you looked for taking up space, for having needs, or for being a person who was like a person in relationships. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we are talking about emotionally immature parents and what they do to you, because the topic of having emotionally immature parents is not new per se. There's actually a whole book about it. I always have it linked in my Amazon storefront below, by the way, if you want to check it out for yourself. But I think there is a lot of discussion about like what emotionally immature parents look like, and not necessarily a lot of discussion about what that does to you. So I want to talk about that today. Things that you might notice in yourself that can be signs that your parents were emotionally immature individuals, and like what that looks like, how that shows up for people, and also like what we do about that, right? So that's it. Let's get into the video. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is this phenomenon of being like an emotional bloodhound. This is a term that Aaron and I sort of like lovingly, jokingly coined in our own relationship, but I think it's very apt because like I experienced this, and it's like a very descriptive term, essentially to mean that you are the person who's very sensitive to other people's emotions. You're very intuitive. You're very adept at identifying and addressing other people's emotions, sometimes before they even notice their emotions, and sometimes before they ask you to do anything about that. If you notice this happening for you in your relationships or in yourself, especially if you have a lot of anxiety about this and you find yourself kind of like constantly having your emotional feelers out there, this might be because you had emotionally immature parents. There are a couple of reasons why this might happen to you, or like a couple of behaviors on behalf of emotionally immature parents. I'm gonna get tired of saying that phrase real fast. The first phenomenon that I want to talk to you about is something called emotional contagion. Essentially, this refers to the phenomenon of one of your parents, one of the adults in your household, being this person who had emotional outbursts that weren't just like outbursts on their own accord, right? But outbursts in a way where it affected the entire household. The way that this looks for folks a lot of times in childhood is that if parent is particularly upset or angry or sad about something, everybody else is gonna fucking sure well know that they're upset about it. And also everybody else's day and schedule, their activities are gonna be disrupted by this, right? We're gonna talk later about how emotionally immature parents find a need to center themselves in everything. And so this is definitely a factor of that also. But if you noticed in childhood that there was often like a really pronounced response to your parent having these wild emotional outbursts, that's essentially what emotional contagion refers to. Along with that, this also has to do with the fact that emotionally immature parents tend to be pretty unpredictable and inconsistent people, which is really scary when you're a child, to be clear. This is inherently a traumatizing thing. I don't think that has to be said, but like just for the sake of validating that, this is very much a trauma to walk through. When emotionally immature parents are inconsistent like this, oftentimes what it will look like is a parent typically having like a routine with kids, as people are wont to do, right? So if it was normal for you growing up to like, you know, all sit down for a meal together when you got home from school, that would be like a normal part of your life. But if your parent had like a shitty day at work, the expectation of like, oh, we're going to do our normal routine to sit down and have dinner, you know, after everybody gets home from school and work, might all of a sudden create this emotional outburst on behalf of your parent to be like, you're all so entitled. This is terrible. Why don't, you know, no one helps me in this household, that kind of behavior. And that's very dysregulating for a child. So what this will mean is that oftentimes these kids, in an attempt to survive and protect themselves in this very inconsistent and emotionally volatile environment, become these people who like try to suss out other people's emotions. You develop this affinity for feeling other people's feelings. I tell Aaron this all the time. There is a moment in Euphoria, which is a problematic show in its own right, to be fair, but it did have a chokehold on me when it first came out. And so there's a moment in that show where Cassie tells her mom, you know, you didn't have to say it. I can fucking feel it. And like, that's very much the experience that a lot of folks have of like this deep intrinsic, almost a somatic kind of knowing about the emotions of people around you. This can also mean, for what it's worth, that you might find yourself cyclically in these relationship patterns with people who are like energy vampires, people who like suck the life and energy out of you because they are like the crisis friend or the person who is like constantly needing other people to caretake them. And you might also find yourself in relationship with people who have really poor boundaries and are apt to walk over top of your boundaries. And so that's something that's really important to be aware of, because emotional sensitivity and like an emotional intelligence is very, very, very much a skill. It's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to develop, especially those who are affected by alexithymia and things like that. So having this like deep inner knowing about your emotions and the emotions of other people can very much be a bonding factor in a relationship And it can become a problem really quickly, especially if it's accompanied by poor boundaries, by a sense of expectation, and also by almost like a compulsive desire to do this, right? If you find that you don't have control over this behavior, then it can become problematic in your relationship in the sense that like that's not a healthy exchange, right? Ideally, healthy relationships are predicated upon some sense of like reciprocity in the way that we are able to trust that if I show up for you, I'm not just a giving tree, right? That I'm able to count on being supported at some point in this relationship. Okay, before we talk about our next tip, I want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Delete Me. We've worked with Delete Me before, and I'm delighted to work with them again. For those of you who don't know, Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that helps remove your personal information from hundreds of data brokers online, which y'all will know if you've been here for any length of time that I feel very strongly about people's right to privacy and also my own privacy. So I'm really excited to work with a company like Delete Me because I trust them so much and because what they're doing is really important. For those of you who don't know, data brokers are corporations that create profiles or listings that are filled with our personal information like our social security number and our birthdays, even information about our relatives. They package all of that up and then they sell it, which I know that we all joke about our online activity being tracked and stuff, but unfortunately the information that data brokers are collecting online about us can be involved in some really scary stuff, actually like identity theft. Thankfully, Delete Me removes your information from hundreds of data brokers, and they will also continually monitor the sites all year long to make sure that you stay removed so that they can help to protect your data. When I saw my dashboard, I was shocked because even though I'm pretty conscious about keeping my information private, Delete Me still found and removed all of this for me. I genuinely feel so much safer for having used Delete Me, and I think that y'all will really enjoy it too. And thankfully, Delete Me hooked it up with a special discount code for all of y'all. You can get 20% off of your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/MickeyAtkins and use promo code MickeyAtkins at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/MickeyAtkins with code MickeyAtkins at checkout. Thank you so much to Delete Me for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. Okay, the second thing that I want to talk to you about is that you might have the tendency to over-explain yourself or to over-apologize. You might find yourself having to over-explain yourself to the nth degree, almost to the degree that you like anticipate people being mad at you. This might also show up as a need to apologize profusely or to apologize like before you even have assurance that people are in fact actually mad at you. Don't get me wrong, this can be attributable to a bunch of other things and like different types of childhood trauma, but the reason that I bring this up here is for a couple of reasons. The first of which being that emotionally immature parents tend to guilt trip their kids. If you noticed in childhood that your parents did the thing where like, especially phrases like, well, I hope you're happy, or like, you know, this like very like stonewalling kind of energy, those kinds of behaviors are hallmarks for emotionally immature parents and create a lot of guilt and shame on behalf of children because it's not appropriate for parents to teach their kids that it's their fault for everything. This might also have showed up for you in your childhood as a parent doing the thing where they find something wrong with everything that you do. And alternatively, it might also be the thing where your parent is incapable of taking responsibility for ways that they've wounded other people or things that they've done wrong generally, right? If it's rare, if not, has never happened, that your parents apologize for you or genuinely take accountability for you, this can be a sign that your parent was an emotionally immature person because, for what it's worth, a lot of the reason that this happens for these folks is because they struggle with such a strong amount of shame and their own self-judgment about themselves that apologizing feels like admitting to this whole world of fault. And like, there's also usually a confusion that if you apologize for having done a wrong thing, that you are in fact a wrong and bad person, which causes people who are emotionally immature parents to be very defensive, to be very blamey, and to also be very guilt trippy with their kids. I think it goes without saying that this is a trauma. This is a very difficult thing to survive. And the thing that you might notice in adulthood then is that anytime, especially when this is coupled with that high emotional awareness, that anytime you get even a whiff of somebody being slightly upset with you, there is an instinct for you to over apologize and to sort of position yourself in this like, please don't be upset at me. Please don't be mad at me. I can fix this kind of posture. Alternatively though, this can also show up for folks in feeling chronically misunderstood and that creating almost like an anger or resentment or like self-righteous indignation of like, if I just could explain myself efficiently or effectively, then you would see that this wasn't my fault. This can mean that folks will struggle with feelings of resentment and feeling unseen and or like misunderstood in their adult relationships. And that can create a whole world of like emotional instability and also struggling to work through conflict resolution with like partners and friends and things like that, because there is this feeling of like, why doesn't anybody give me a chance to explain myself? Why I've never, people never listen to me. People never value the things that I want to say. And if you would just listen to me, then you wouldn't be mad at me. This is oftentimes a childhood response of like the thing we wish we could have said to our parent especially the emotionally immature one, that can come out in our adult relationships towards the people that we're either partnered with or, again, friends with, or just like in relationship with in some capacity. Okay, the third thing that I want to talk to you about is that oftentimes you might feel very uncomfortable, if not like it's impossible for you to take up space in your relationships. This can be both in the like attention way, right? Like being very uncomfortable with being the center of attention or having people focus their time and energy towards you. But this can also be struggling to set boundaries or enforce boundaries, or even feel like wanting to set boundaries is okay or allowed. This is for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that emotionally immature parents are historically famously fucking bad at boundaries. These are people who, because of their lack of emotional development and emotional intelligence, really struggle to conceptualize their kids as autonomous and individual beings. And so the idea that your kids, especially as they grow up and individuate and like separate from family of origin, as they do that and as they set their own boundaries, that feels like a betrayal to an emotionally immature parent, because they perceive their kids as an extension of them, as like an arm or a limb, like part of them. And especially a lot of times because of this emotional immaturity, they conceptualize that child's role as being inherently uplifting to them. The other elephant in the room here that I think is important to address is that emotionally immature parents are often people who are very selfish and or self-centered, people who feel the need to have the limelight on them all the time, which, being a child of that person, makes you feel like you're never allowed to be the center of attention. This can also mean, by the way, that in your childhood, you might have noticed your parent either living vicariously through you, right? Needing you to be perfect at everything, needing you to high achieve at everything so as to uplift their ego and make them feel good about themselves. But it might have also looked like your parent shitting on your accomplishments or trying to take the attention away from you anytime that you achieved something, because they felt threatened by not being in the limelight. So especially, this is particularly common in this like competitive dynamic that will exist between a mother and a daughter. An emotionally immature mother will often feel this competitive energy with her child to the degree that we'll see things like wearing white to your wedding, like fainting or having a mysterious health issue on big holidays or on your birthday or on any day that's meant to be about you, right? Also needing to make big announcements about their life or their news and things like that. This is a behavior also that gets confused a lot. I want to be clear, this is not diagnostic information. This is more like food for thought information. Discuss this with your own therapist if it resonates with you. There's always links in the description to find one if you need it. However, this often gets confused with people labeling their parents as narcissists. And I want to be clear, there is some crossover there, right? There is definitely a Venn diagram situation happening. And also, I think a lot of the popular discourse on the internet and on social media has sort of run away with this distinction of narcissistic personality disorder to the degree that we are labeling any Tom, Dick, or Harry who seems to be selfish as a narcissist. And like, as a clinician, I very much disagree with that, because we can see similar behaviors being a result of things like being an emotionally immature parent who struggled to develop emotionally past like an adolescence or young adulthood, which therefore means that you behave in this very childish way of like, me, everybody look at me, right? And so when somebody who is an emotionally immature mother, for example, struggles to conceptualize herself as an adult being who is aging, who's like losing their youth, and who's losing a lot of the social capital and power that's attributed to those identity factors, this can create a vitriol and a disgust and an anger towards your female children, towards your daughters. That's unwarranted, that's gross, that's traumatizing, to be clear, and also might not be attributable to clinical narcissism, but rather this inability to conceptualize that like it's your role to step back here. It's your job as a parent to be in the background and uplift your children and let them shine, right? So if you notice this happening in your childhood, this might also have been your parents attributing all of your successes to their excellent parenting, right? Something that Erin and I are very familiar with. Feeling as though all of our life's accomplishments only exist to be viewed through the lens of like, see, I'm a good parent. See, this is proof that I'm a good person because look at what wonderful, beautiful children I produced. It's a very traumatizing thing for a child to walk through and to feel like you're never allowed to take up space, like you're not allowed to be the center of attention. And this is why we'll see this discomfort show up again and again, both where you will shy away from people wanting to focus on you. You might be just uncomfortable with gifts. You might be uncomfortable with birthdays and weddings and those types of events, but you might also be a person who struggles to set boundaries, right? This feeling of like, this feels like an overreach, or like somebody is pulling at me or asking too much of me, but I don't know how to say no, right? This is often because emotionally immature parents make their kids feel as though boundary setting is a betrayal. This is an inherent act of hurt, and this is painful for your parent, for you to dare to need space for yourself, especially amongst emotionally immature parents who use their kids as an emotional outlet or treat them as a confidant or peer. This is a very common issue. And in your adult relationships, this can be a particularly dangerous combo with that high emotional sensitivity that we talked about earlier, right? People who struggle to center themselves and to like voice or even feel okay to have their own needs, and are also really, really perceptive of other people's wants and emotions, and struggle to set those limits. Again, you might find yourself cyclically in these relationships where people take and take and take and take from you without any feedback, or without any sort of even exchange or like flow of energy and care and compassion. And this can also be a thing that creates a dynamic where people are almost intoxicated by the way that you see them, right? When you're very emotionally sensitive and your impulse is to immediately abandon yourself, this can cause other people who, especially people who are like chronically in need of support, this can cause those people to feel like you are the center of their world. They need you in their relationship, and they will do anything to keep hold of you. And these people, while sometimes people do this in a malicious way, sometimes people do also do this in like a accidental way. Both are bad for you, though, to be clear. Neither of these things are healthy. In a healthy relationship where someone's doing it on accident, obviously there can be a conversation and a greater discourse about like, we should undo that, right? People who are doing this maliciously to you, you might need to implement stricter, firmer boundaries. Sometimes this means going no contact with people, for example. But if you notice this coming up in your relationship, it's very possible that it's a result of these chronic behaviors that happened for you in childhood, where you felt like you were being punished any which way you looked for taking up space, for having needs, or for being a person who was like a person in relationships. I only talked about these 3 things today because there's a whole world of like signs and symptoms and things that are associated with having emotionally immature parents, things that we might notice in ourselves. So if you guys want me to talk in more detail about this, let me know. I am also happy to make a follow-up or part 2 of this where we talk about what to do, right? Like, how do we address these things? What the fuck are we meant to do with all of these things that can be, again, very unsafe and very damaging for us in our adult relationships? So if you want that, if you need that, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to make that. That said, if you like the video, we do talk about stuff like this, and we also do a cute little pop culture moment that I'd love to have you stay for. We also have podcast episodes going up on Thursday and live streams happening on Friday. So come hang out with me. Come watch reality TV with me. It's a fun time. In the meantime, though, you can subscribe to the channel, and you can also share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday.